Greek protesters and riot police have clashed in central Athens after anti-US rallies turned violent. Petrol bombs were met with tear gas as rioters tried to break through police cordons to reach Parliament buildings. About 7,000 people, among them anti-war, anti-racism, leftist groups, trade unionists and Communist Party supporters, all expressed their anger at Washington. We consider American policy as murderous to the people. They're responsible for the outcome of the Arab Spring, for all the wars since then, for the intervention in Syria. They only care for oil and don't care about the people. The outbreak of violence came as President Obama was having dinner nearby with members of the Greek government. Demonstrators were also at odds with Obama's successor, Donald Trump, his pledge to build a wall on America's southern border and his general stance over immigrants.
Turn now to our world lead. The elusive ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi may be hiding in northern Iraq. That's according to a majority Shiite paramilitary force known as the Popular Mobilization Units, or PMUs. This as anti-ISIS forces are pushing forward to take back Mosul, closing in on ISIS from several fronts, with Iraqi and Peshmerga forces pushing in from the east, and with these PMU units moving in from the west.
In February, German Chancellor Angela Merkel visits Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara. For Merkel, it's crucial for Turkey to curb the flow of refugees into Europe. In Berlin, the pressure is huge. More than 1 million refugees have arrived in Germany. However, bilateral relations will become more tense when the German parliament passes a resolution declaring the 1915 killing of Armenians by Ottoman forces a genocide. The vote is welcomed by Armenians but provokes the wrath of Ankara. Berlin again sends a strong signal to Ankara when the German president receives at the beginning of November the former editor of Cumhuriyet, Can Dündar. Dündar and another prominent journalist flee to Germany after being condemned for espionage after publishing a video that allegedly showed trucks belonging to the state intelligence agency carrying ammunition to Syrian militants. Since the failed coup in July, the arrests of journalists have increased, accused by the Turkish authorities of links with so-called terrorist organizations, namely the PKK, or Kurdistan Workers' Party, and the movement of preacher Fethullah Gulen. But Berlin considers such measures against the media an attack on press freedom.
The Chinese president has now issued a warning to President-elect Donald Trump. According to Fred Maxwell at Western Journalism, he reports that President-elect Donald Trump received a phone call on Sunday from President Xi Jinping, who warned Trump of consequences if the United States were to impose a tariff on goods imported from China. They write that throughout his campaign, Trump said he would place a 45% trade tariff on Chinese goods. And it's about time we did that. And I know, like, all of my libertarian friends are going to be like freaking out because they they don't like barriers to trade. And, actually it's strange because libertarians, they advocate for like open borders, and that's like a globalist New World Order plank that libertarians, I ain't like one of them libertarians, okay? Sorry.
Here's something new. More than 70% of anti-Trump protesters arrested in Portland, Oregon last week did not vote in the state of Oregon. KGTV dug into state election records, and good for them, and found that at least 79 of the 112 people taken into custody during those demonstrations were either not registered to vote in Oregon or did not cast a ballot there in the 2016 election. The Portland protests spanned 5 nights and devolved into violent riots that caused more than $1 million worth of property damage and scared the hell out of everyone.
We're going to suspend immigration from terror-prone regions where vetting cannot safely occur. Radical Islamic terror is right around the corner. We have to be so tough, so smart, so vigilant. We can't allow that to happen. We have enough problems. All vetting of people coming into our country will be considered extreme vetting. We will be very careful.
Now, that was President-elect Donald Trump promising extreme vetting to keep you, the American people, safe. Now, there's good reason to worry. Now, police in Germany, they stage anti-terror raids in 60 cities targeting an ultra-conservative Islamic missionary group, which is accused of trying to recruit for ISIS. Now, Germany may also have another problem on their hands. From January to June of this year, over 370,000 asylum seekers were registered in that country. U.S. officials have been warning that ISIS will try and infiltrate the refugee population here. Joining us with reaction, the leader of the Brexit movement, and also, as you see him here, he met with President-elect Donald Trump over the weekend, Nigel Farage, and the author of Defeating Jihad, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, who I would argue is a good candidate for a Trump administration. Nigel, I want to talk about this through this prism, the Islamization of Europe and what happened in Germany, because we have James Comey, we have Michael Steinbeck, the assistant FBI director, our CIA director Brennan, our House Homeland Security Committee chair McCall, and then the former special envoy to defeat ISIS, all have said that ISIS will infiltrate the refugee population. How dangerous has it been for Europe, and what can we learn from you?
Well, it's been disastrous, and of course Angela Merkel took the very opposite policy position to the one that President-elect Trump is taking. She said, if you remember last year, please all come, we can take as many people as you can send. And what have we seen? Not just a rise of radical groups, the likes of which the German police are trying their best to hunt down today, but also we saw those scenes, remember, on New Year's Eve at Cologne train station. The mass, open, sexual violation of women going on in a Western German city. Now, I'm not saying that because I want to demonize anybody, but I am saying this. What's happened from many of these Middle Eastern countries is the spread of ISIS. I feel that we ourselves may be partly responsible for causing it by toppling Saddam, by getting rid of Gaddafi, but whatever, the fact is it's there. And remember that in these countries, women are at very best second-class citizens. So at best, we're bringing in a problem, a cultural problem, that is going to be very difficult to assimilate and maintain our values. And at worst, we're bringing in people who actually want to kill us.
This, as the Islamic State group has summarily killed 21 civilians in the city that it's accused of collaborating with US-backed security forces. This according to medical sources who've been speaking to Agence France-Presse news agency. The 4-week campaign is the biggest military operation in Iraq in more than a decade. Let's get more now from Rob Parsons in Erbil. Rob, it seems the Iraqi forces are now in control of at least a third of the city's east, and that they are slowly reaching their targets.
Yes, I mean, an Iraqi general said that they're in control of a third of the east of Mosul. It's not entirely clear what that means. As one coalition officer put it, you know, we're not measuring the territory here. There's no easy way of saying exactly how far they've got. But certainly the overall impression is that the Iraqi army is achieving its objectives, at least in the east of Mosul. It's recaptured at least 10 districts.
Russia says it has launched a large-scale operation to deliver airstrikes against terrorists in the Syrian provinces of Idlib and Homs.
We continue to support the Syrian armed forces in the fight against terrorism, and in accordance with these tasks, today we launched a large-scale operation to defeat en masse the positions of ISIS and Jabhat al-Nusra in the Idlib and Homs provinces. This operation involves the Admiral Grigorovich. Today it launched cruise missiles on predetermined and explored targets.
The Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that jets from the Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier are involved in the operation for the first time. The warship is located off Syria's coast in the Mediterranean. Shoigu stressed that the airstrikes are targeting ammunition depots, terrorist training camps, and arms factories. Russian jets have been striking terrorists across Syria at the request of Damascus since September 30, 2015. Richard Hayden Black is a Republican member of the Virginia State Senate, joining us from Broadlands. So the first time that Russia is using its aircraft carrier launching strikes, why would you think Russia has chosen this time to do it?
I think we're on the verge of the final battle for the Aleppo pocket. The Syrian army has effectively closed off the pocket. There are claims, I think wildly exaggerated, that there are 250,000 people there. I think it's considerably less. But in any event, the battle lines are formed. Forces have come in. There are some from Russia. There are considerable from Iran, from Lebanon. And I think they're prepared for the final battle that will extinguish the Aleppo pocket. So the Russians have been accumulating all of their air forces and air power, and I think this will begin probably within the next several days.
Well, the way you make it sound is that this battle overall then is going to be over. Is that what I'm gathering from you? And if so, then what would be the predicaments that the U.S. faces and its regional allies, who obviously have been pushing to oust Assad all these years?
Well, the Obama administration has supported ISIS and Al Qaeda, all of the terrorists throughout the last period, and I think we're in a period of uncertainty. We believe that President Trump will cut the supplies to the terrorists, which will have a devastating impact on them. At that point, they'll just simply be reliant on Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and as you know, Saudi Arabia is very tied up where they are in rather desperate straits against the poor nation of Yemen.
The Russian Defense Minister has announced the country's air force has begun a large-scale anti-terror combat operation in the Syrian provinces of Homs and Idlib.
For the first time in the history of the military operations of the Russian Navy, an aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, has taken part. Su-33s were also launched from this carrier. Before that, we conducted serious surveillance of all the targets. That's why the main targets have been determined. They're munition warehouses, spots occupied by the militants, to be more precise, terrorists.
Well, we can go live now to Brad Hoff, a US Marine veteran, joining us live to give us some expert insight into what's been going on there on the western coast of Syria with the next phase of that operation. Thanks for joining us live today, Brad. Just to lay people who perhaps aren't so knowledgeable on military tactics, what's the actual advantage of having this aircraft carrier there? It's travelled so far all the way from northern Russia. What does it add to this operation?
Well, of course, it adds major, overwhelming airstrikes to support military movements on the ground. Of course, in 2003, with the invasion of Iraq, the Bush White House called this tactic shock and awe. But of course, this is a very different kind of situation where I see Russia's entry into the theater as initially more defensive. But at this point, obviously, there are people saying it's time to end this war. And I think you actually have a quiet nod coming from the Obama White House, who's, of course, finishing his term. He's on his last trip to Europe as we speak. I doubt that any of this would be happening now without some kind of U.S.-Russian military-to-military communication.
And speaking of that timing, you mentioned, of course, last week, the U.S. President, or outgoing U.S. President Barack Obama, ordered that all that al-Nusra terrorists can now be targeted. He made that decision after the election of Trump. There's been no decisive action yet so far, though, from the U.S.-led coalition. Do you think that's likely to happen anytime soon?
I do not. I actually think the decisive action is simply to look the other way as Russia escalates its operations. Of course, the fact that there's a Russian carrier in the Mediterranean was no secret to anyone. The fact that it's parked where it is, I think, was definitely allowed by the Western coalition. I think the West...
Russian air power has resumed operations against rebel and jihadist forces in Syria battling the government. Fighter bombers have been supported by missile strikes from the Russian flotilla in the Mediterranean. attacking targets in Idlib, while Syrian government forces have stepped up attacks in eastern Aleppo, including more barrel bomb drops from helicopters. Based on our research, we have defined the main targets. They are ammunition warehouses, places of concentration of illegal armed groups, or to be precise, terrorists. Russia insisted its planes were not hitting targets in Aleppo, and had not in the last 28 days. The use of Russian planes against Syria's largest city has drawn fierce criticism from some quarters, and there are reportedly no ISIL forces involved in the fighting there, although Islamic militants Jabhat Fatah al-Sham are active. Russian planes also bombed targets in Homs. Airstrikes hit 3 hospitals in towns and villages in rebel-held areas west of Aleppo, putting them out of action. Residents said the bombing was intense, although for the moment only 3 civilian deaths have been reported.
Fox News alert a shooting at the Will Rogers Airport in Oklahoma City. This just coming into our newsroom. We can confirm that 1 person has been shot. It happened in a parking garage there. We don't know much about this yet, but it is happening right now. There are multiple officers on the scene. You're obviously seeing a shot of things going on. There's squad cars lined up all the way up to the airport. We will bring you any breaking news on this story as it comes into our newsroom. And they are also saying if you're traveling, please don't head to the airport there in Oklahoma City.
The president-elect's tweets over the popular vote, which Hillary Clinton won. He also tweeted about the Electoral College. But those 2 different outcomes this time are helping to fuel the protests and new cases of hate. Tonight in Washington, D.C., young people walking out of school, flooding the national monuments. And it also comes amid new and disturbing images tonight from supporters of both sides. ABC's Mary Bruce now.
In the nation's capital today, hundreds of students put down their pens and picked up a protest sign.
We want to let Donald Trump know that he cannot divide us with his racism, sexism, all that bigotry.
They took over Pennsylvania Avenue, shut down the Lincoln Memorial.
Hundreds of D.C. students walking out of class to walk to Capitol Hill and make sure their voices are heard, even though most of them are too young to vote.
Many of them frustrated that those who are now protesting elsewhere and who could have voted did not.
You should have voted. If you didn't vote at all, you pretty much just voted for Trump.
And listening at the back of this protest, Trump supporters.
Give it a chance, accept the election. If you don't like it in 3.5 years, 4 years, vote him out.
President Bashar al-Assad says Donald Trump could be a natural ally in the fight against terrorism. But in his first reaction to Trump's election victory, the Syrian leader told Portuguese television that he's unsure Trump will be able to keep his word and step up the fight against the jihadists.
For us, it's still dubious whether he can do or live up to his promises or not. That's why we are very cautious in judging him, especially as he wasn't in a political position before. But if, let's say if he's going to fight the terrorists, of course we're going to be ally, natural ally in that regard, with the Russians, with the Iranians, with many other countries who wanted to defeat the terrorists.
Assad also applauded Russian support for his regime. The airstrikes on both ISIL and rebel positions have helped his government forces make advances on several fronts. By complimenting Moscow, he inferred criticism of Washington.
The Russians always based their policies on values. And these values are the sovereignty of other countries, the international law, respecting other people, other cultures, so they don't interfere in whatever related to the future of Syria or the Syrian people.
Current US policy is to strike against ISIL while supporting moderate rebels opposed to Assad. Trump has already indicated he might withdraw US support for the Syrian opposition.
Next, a group of men have gone on trial in the UK for allegedly using humanitarian convoys to smuggle cash to Syria. It's claimed that money was then used to buy weapons for terrorists. RT's correspondent Anastasia Churkina reports.
We do know that a jury court in London has been hearing this case regarding 4 men allegedly involved in using Syrian humanitarian aid convoys to pass along certain, quote, items for terrorist purposes. And while all 4 men in this case deny the charge, we do know that the prosecution has been saying, quote, the defendants made use, or so it would appear, of aid convoys as a means of moving money and other property out of the UK to Syria. Now, we do know that one of the men is 37-year-old Syed Hoque, who was initially stopped at Heathrow Airport back in August 2014 with his wife when they were returning from Bangladesh. Their phones were seized from them and data downloaded. The prosecution has said that initially no extremist material was discovered, but further analysis led them to believe that he has been using WhatsApp to communicate with his nephew, who was based in Syria and fighting along al-Nusra. And through this exchange, the prosecution claims that the man had sent over £4,500 to his nephew, as well as advised him on issues such as beheading enemies. To be more specific, the prosecution said, quote, "In the case of Syed Hoque, the property included money intended at least in part to be used to provide a firearm to his nephew, who was fighting out in Syria and fighting with the purpose of overthrowing the existing regime in Syria." End quote.